Hello, brothers and sisters. I am going to try and figure out what this is. When I first started reading the Bible, I got a vision of a girl, and the next day that girl got into my cab. In the dream, I saw details about her, which I would have otherwise not known, and when I asked, she did have those details about her. Now, she said that her mom was playing with Ouija when she was in her womb, and her husband and her had been being haunted by this thing knocking 3 times on windows and doors, and there was no one there. She caught it on nanny cam descending on her kid in his crib. I believe what this thing that was caught on camera is one of the 1/3 fallen from heaven. Now, I saw a vision of black flame, and the next day a video popped up on my YouTube channel about black flame without me even thinking about it. Now, here's clips from the 3 Action Lab videos I saw.
Way producing a pattern like this. At this location in space there's high pressure, and at this location there's low pressure. So it goes from high pressure, low pressure, high pressure, low pressure. Well, in order to cancel that sound, all you would need to do is produce a low pressure in the area that has a high pressure, and it would cancel out to 0 pressure. So what you do is just make an opposite curve to this. And so these cancel out, so you end up just with a straight line of constant pressure. So by adding 2 sounds that are out of phase with each other, then you get no sound. So now, couldn't we do the same thing with light? Well, it's a little bit more difficult. So light also has wave-like properties. For example, let's say we have a wavelength of light that looks like this. So this wave here of light doesn't represent high or low pressure like with sound, but what it actually represents is at this area in space, there's a high electric field or a magnetic field, and at this location, there's a low electric or magnetic field. Now the electric field goes like this, and the magnetic field is at a right angle to that coming out of the paper. But let's just look at the electric field for now. So in order to cancel this light out, what we would need to do is either get this same light shifted a half a wavelength, or have another light source in exactly the same location that produced an electric field that was completely opposite to this. Well, it's much easier to just have a light source that's shifted back a little bit. So if we could produce light coming from the exact same source that was just half a wavelength or some multiple of a half a wavelength out of phase with the source, then you could produce a light signal that looks like this, so that you end up with no light coming out of it. So the problem with doing this with light is you need your 2 light sources that are going to be canceling each other to come from the exact same location. But last I checked, you can't get 2 light sources in the same location. So if I have 2 flashlights, I can't get one right in front of the other, or else I'll block one of them. And if I even put them close to each other, they won't be in the exact same location either. They'll be at an angle to each other. So we have to use a little trick to get the 2 light sources to be in the exact same spot. Well, we can actually get the 2 light sources to come from the same location if we use something called a beam splitter. So what a beam splitter does is it lets half of the light go through it, and it lets half of the light get reflected off of it. So if you turn it at a 45-degree angle like this to both of your light sources, it will reflect this one off at a 90-degree angle, and then your second light source, it will reflect off also. But remember, it lets also half the light through. So 50% of this light will come through, and 50% of this light will come through. So what you get now is 2 light sources coming from the exact same location. So now if these 2 light sources are exactly equal length from this beam splitter, what you'll get is just a normal light. But if you move this even any multiple of a half a wavelength away further than this light source, then you should get some interference pattern on wherever you're shining this light. So that when you turn on one light, it's bright, but then when you turn on the other light, it actually goes darker. Okay, so here's what shows up on the backstop when I have one light, kind of this dim red patch. But when I turn on the other light, it gets brighter, but there's dark spots. So you can see that there's these interference patterns showing up now. Let me turn off the other light, and then turn it on. Off, on, off, on.
Now when red, green, and blue are mixed together, it makes white. And the absence of light is blackness, or it looks like the opposite of light. Alright, so what I gleaned from this is that thing is from the same light source, God, and it is opposite. It's operating at the negative electric and magnetic field of God. Now, here's the even crazier thing. It's operating at the negative electric and magnetic field of the light source of El Shaddai, but it gets even crazier. Time becomes relative the faster you go. So here's another video from Action Lab explaining this. Please watch it through.
Hey everybody, today I'm going to be showing you what it would look like if we slowed down the speed limit of the universe to near walking speed. So what would it look like if the speed of light, it were only about 2 meters per second? Well, then we would start to see some of the relativistic effects that seem so far-fetched to us in our daily lives. I'm going to be using a relativity physics simulator created by MIT. Now in this physics simulator, what they did is they slowed down the speed of light. So they slowed down the speed limit of the universe to be at near walking speeds. And they actually turned it in a game to make it a little bit more interesting. What they did is there's these small orbs in the game, and as you collect them, it slows the speed of light down. So at first, the speed of light is pretty slow already, but as you collect these orbs, it gets slower and slower and slower. Your walking speed stays the same. But in this game, because the speed of light has been slowed down, when we start walking, we start to see relativistic effects that include time dilation and length contraction, and also Doppler shifting. Okay, let's collect these orbs now. So in this simulation, you can see on the bottom bar here, on the left is the number of orbs collected. The more I collect, the slower the speed of light's going to go. On the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the white needle is the speed of light, and then you can see my walking speed on that same dial. So what this means is that as I collect more orbs, the speed of light is going to slow down more and more and more, and my walking speed is going to get closer and closer and closer to it as I walk. So finally, when I collect the last orb, my walking speed is going to be really close to the speed of light. So the relativistic effect should be really strong by the end of it. So as you start walking through the game, one of the first things that you'll notice is that as soon as you start walking, you see a color shift happen. Now this color shift is due to the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect occurs when you're moving relative to the source emitting light. So in this village that we're walking around in, you'll notice that there's some huts with chimneys, there's some cliffs in the background, and there's these tall pillars. Now as we're walking around, notice the color shift occurring. As soon as we start walking, we see this color shift towards the blue spectrum. Now the reason we see a blue shift when we walk towards the source of light is because as we're walking towards it, we're seeing the peaks and valleys of those electromagnetic waves occur more frequently. And so it seems as though it's actually a higher frequency. So what that means is that normally light that we can't see, like infrared light, as we walk towards it, it gets shifted more towards the red end of the spectrum instead of the infrared part of the spectrum. So it moves up in frequency. And since it moves up in frequency, it becomes visible light to us. And so you'll notice on these chimneys and the houses, as we walk towards it, we can actually see it. And similarly, any light that's behind us is going to be shifted more towards the red end of the spectrum. So anything that was visible, like red light, is suddenly going to become infrared light that we can't see. So if we move backwards, things become darker or more red. Now you can see this a little bit more clearly if I walk sideways instead of forward. As I walk sideways, you can see the side that I'm moving is blue shifted and the side that I'm walking away from is red shifted. Now this type of Doppler shift we can actually see in real life. In fact, that's how we know when stars or galaxies are moving towards us or away from us, is because they're red shifted or blue shifted. And it turns out that pretty much everything we look at around us, all the galaxies that we're looking at around us, are all red shifted. So it means they're moving away from us.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it real quick. So the faster you go towards the speed of light, traveling towards, you get quickened light waves, which are ultraviolet, and when you move away, you get infrared, slower wavelengths. So, going over to Einstein's theory of relativity, mass-energy equivalence. In physics, mass-energy equivalence is the relationship between mass and energy in a system's rest frame, where the two values differ only by a constant in the units of measurement. The formula defines the energy, E, of a particle in its rest frame as the product of mass, m, with the speed of light squared, c squared. Because the speed of light is a large number in everyday units, approximately 3 times 10 to the 8th power meters per second. The formula implies that a small amount of rest mass corresponds to an enormous amount of energy, which is independent of the composition of the matter. Rest mass, also called invariant mass, is the mass that is measured when the system is at rest. It is a fundamental physical property that is independent from momentum. Even at extreme speeds approaching the speed of light, i.e., its value is the same in all inertial frames of reference. Massless particles, such as photons, have zero invariant mass, but massless free particles have both momentum and energy. The equivalence principle implies that when energy is lost in chemical reactions, nuclear reactions, and other energy transformations, the system will also lose a corresponding amount of mass. The energy and mass can be released to the environment as radiant energy, such as light, or as thermal energy. The principle is fundamental to many fields of physics, including nuclear and particle physics. Now, this wavelength that we are being shown, the ones that we can actually see, the expansion of that, it kind of seems familiar, right? God giving us the sign of the rainbow.
And because they're all redshifted, that helped us know that the universe is actually expanding because everything's moving away from everything else.
Now, solid physical matter expands when you introduce energy into it. Here's an example. So, expansion equals the concentration or introduction of more energy into a certain amount of mass or system.
Okay, we're really slowing down the speed of light now, so the effects are getting a lot more dramatic as I collect these orbs. Whoa, we got a lot there. Now the other thing to notice is that as the speed of light slows down more and more and more, notice that this effect gets stronger and stronger as we walk. The Doppler shifting is broader so that invisible light suddenly becomes visible to us, and also the effect is stronger, the brightness increases. That's because as we're walking towards it, we're actually hitting more photons along the way than we normally would. So basically it increases the intensity as we're walking towards it, as opposed to just standing still. Now in normal life, we don't see this effect at all because it doesn't really matter how fast we're walking. We're in such a slow speed compared to the speed of light that we don't see the increase in photons. But in this simulation, the propagation of light is so slow that if we start walking towards it, we can really pile up those photons in front of us, and so that you can really see this intensity increase as we walk towards it. And you can also see the intensity decrease as we walk away from something. That's why it just gets darker and dimmer and more redshifted. Okay, now the Doppler effect is interesting, but now let's get into the really interesting parts: time dilation and length contraction. So first, let's talk about time dilation. So when you move closer to the speed of light, your time relative to somebody who's not moving decreases. So your clock slows down. Now to understand why your time slows down when you start moving faster, think of it this way. Space and time are always connected. If you're completely at rest, not moving, all of your movement is going through time and not through space. So you're at rest, but you're still moving forward through time.
Okay, so solid matter is moving slower relative to the speed of light, therefore it is traveling faster in time. Thus, time is relative to God. 1,000 years is to one day as 1 day to 1,000 years to him.
But if you start to move forward through space, then that means your movement through time has to decrease. So the faster you move through space, the slower your movement through time is going to be.
So the faster you move towards the speed of light, the more your time slows down. Now, they call El Shaddai, the Ancient of Days, God. He is forever young. He never ages. He is always traveling at the speed of light. 144,000 meters per second.
Father of all form, the blueprint of creation, is a shadow of a three-dimensional construct of the sacred sites around the earth. So I'm calling it flower of life equals speed of light. So FOL equals SOL is a kind of an acronym to say the flower of life has a connection to the speed of light.
So the speed of light equals 144,000, just like in the Bible, of arc grid per second.
And so what's also interesting as well is that when we look at the whole flower of life, we want to look at what's called nodal points. So there's a node in the middle. Let's count them here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wherever I touch these center points, they're called nodes or intersections of the circles. So if you counted all the intersecting points, we have 37 pulsing nodes. And that's got to do a lot with the speed of light and the sun energy, because 37 is a critical part of what we call the magic square of 6 by 6. The magic square attributed to the sun has all its columns, rows and diagonals adding up to the number 111, but all the pairs are grouped according to a formula where we add the first number plus the last number. So 1 plus 36 is 37.
You guys, it's starting to all come together. The angel number 111, 222, 333, 444, 555, 666, which is Satan, 777, 888, which means Jesus. Oh my God.
So there's 37 nodal points on the flower of life, and 37 is connected to what we call the magic square of the sun. So that
Could the 144,000 be the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit divided into 3? Jesus came to call the 144,000 chosen ones, the sons of God. This 1/3 of the heavenly realm dropped and became opposite wavelengths of God's light, and Jesus is going to replace it.
Moving at the speed of light, all of your movement is through space, so none of it can be through time. So at the speed of light, there's absolutely no movement through time. Now, of course, this time dilation is only relative to somebody watching you do that movement, but you yourself always experience time at the same rate.
You guys, the 144,000 are being called by God in order to become beings of light. And God's holy pattern is the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio, the point in which the expansion rate is taking place. From 1 to 144,000 is 12, the 12 tribes of Judah. And then the next step is the 13th tribe, which Jesus took the place of.
Check this out. Look at the craftiness of most of those who translated the Bible. I'm going to say a couple things to you that's going to help you realize. Now, I'm going to post a link below this video of the video that I did explaining Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8, and how the proper translation is the sons of God, not the sons of Israel. And when you read the context, you see that it doesn't even make sense to read it as the sons of Israel. The proper translation is the sons of God. Why would they change it to the sons of Israel, even though the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are older than the Hebraic artifact that they found, translates it as, reads as the sons of God? Why would they change it to the sons of Israel?
But let's see if you guys will stick with me here. So today, someone commented on a video that I posted a long time ago about God's fingerprint in nature. He said it's a great video. And I rewatched the video. And as I was rewatching the video, something hit me. Now, this is going to be something that atheists would find interesting, but I know how the atheists are. No matter what, they just would not believe. So this video isn't really for the atheists. It's for us who already believe. But it's something very interesting in the Bible that shows the Fibonacci sequence, which is termed as God's fingerprint in nature. Now, God's fingerprint in nature, this code that was found was discovered in the medieval times and has been more profound today, as is found more and more in different things found in nature. But yet this sequence was already coined by Yeshua, our master, with the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, I just want you guys to pay attention to something. And what you're watching now, this isn't really what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about something beyond this. And you're going to understand, but just keep watching.
What we are seeing is intelligent design, which might be described as God's fingerprints upon nature. One of the more fascinating math relationships was first described back in medieval times, 8 centuries ago. The scholar's name was Leonardo Fibonacci, an outstanding Italian mathematician. He excelled in many areas, and one in particular. He generated a long list of numbers by, in each case, adding together the 2 previous numbers. You can begin with a 2 and a 3. You add them together and you get 5. Now add 3 and 5 to get 8. Then add 5 and 8 to get 13. The Fibonacci sequence keeps going like this: 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, and so on. What Fibonacci realized.
Now, most patterns ends at 144, which is why they're stopping at 144. And the image they're about to show you is going to stop at 144, which is the image of a seashell. And the pattern of the galaxies, and the pattern of rose petals, and the patterns of sunflowers. Right now, the 12 tribes of Israel. Why is it 12 tribes? We always had this question about, why does God keep choosing 12 disciples? Christ chose 12 disciples. God chooses 12 tribes to become the nation of Israel. And 12,000 out of each tribe, which is 12,000 out of each tribe of Israel, which is 12 total tribes, makes 144,000 individuals. Right? Now, if you start from the 1, because 0 is 0, so 0 doesn't count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's the Fibonacci sequence. And if that's not convincing enough, it ends at 144 when it gets to the 12th number. So that's 12,000 out of each tribe, which is 144,000. Now, why this is so significant is that this sequence is the sequence that God has fashioned most of the things on earth after, and even the universe that's around us. As this video will continue to show you, it's the spiral of the galaxies above us, is the spiral of the solar system, is the spiral of seashells of your ear, your inner ear, is a spiral of things within your body, is a spiral of things all around us. So this means that this pattern governs us, right? Now, if this pattern governs us, which it does, it makes sense that God is choosing this same sequence of individuals to go to heaven to make up the 144,000, to rule with Christ over the earth, because this sequence is what governs the earth. Do you guys see what I'm seeing? So keep listening real quick, and I'll expand later.
What Fibonacci realized was that this elegant list of numbers describes many items to be found in nature. For example, flower petals.
L'exemple des pétales d'une marguerite. Vous dites, il n'y a pas de hasard au nombre de pétales d'une marguerite.
Non, absolument. Le nombre de pétales de marguerite est en fait inscrit dans un scénario.
That there is a mathematically precise structure to the universe and everything in it. One everyday example of this precision can be found in the plants. Many plants, including elm trees, grow their leaves 20 twigs and branches placed exactly halfway around the stem from each other. Next in the series are plants like the beech tree, with leaves placed 1/3 of the way round the stem from the previous leaves. Third in the series are the plants like the oak, with leaves placed at every 2/5 of a turn. The holly plant is the next at 3/8, while the larch trees are the next at 5/13, and the sequence goes on and on. Notice the number sequence of these fractions: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. Each number is the sum of the two numbers which came just before it in the sequence. This particular mathematical pattern is called the Fibonacci series.
Take, for example, the sunflower. The display of its florets are in perfect spirals of 55, 34, and 21. The sequence of Fibonacci, the sequence of Fibonacci, the sequence of Fibonacci, the sequence of Fibonacci.
Now, if you go back and see my previous videos, I made a video of my prophetic dreams about sunflowers turning into trees and then sweet manna coming from it and me getting anointed with manna before me having the prophetic dream of receiving the white stone with the heavenly seal and a new name only I know.
There is a mathematically precise structure to the universe and everything within it. Now, the 144,000, what's the whole point of God choosing 12,000 out of each tribe of Israel? What's the point of that? Now, he's not just doing something through just coincidence or randomness. No, just as much as the universe, he did not create the universe through random chance. But everything has a structure. And coincidentally, or not coincidentally, systematically, it has the same structure that ends in 144,000 as on the 12th number, precisely on the 12th number. Oh, and this video is 12 minutes and 12 seconds long. Well, that's just it. Anyway, on the 12th, the 12th number is 144,000. Now, if this is the number that governs the universe, which God has used to govern the universe, so that so many things fashion itself after this Fibonacci sequence, then it would make sense that since mankind has deviated from the natural order that God created us to pattern ourselves after, it would only make sense that he would send that same number of individuals to heaven to govern us, to get us back to perfection during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Now, that 144,000, the 12 apostles are part of the anointed, right? That's why Christ chose 12 apostles to fashion after the anointed, which is why when Judas lost his spot as one of the 12, now it's only 11, right? The first century Christians came together to choose who will replace Judas's spot. This is in the Bible, okay? And they had two candidates. The first century Christians had two candidates. Again, this is in the Bible. And through the help of the Holy Spirit, they chose one out of the two candidates to replace Judas's spot. So the 144,000 is so limited that when people lose their spots, someone else have to take that spot, because that's a seat in heaven.
Okay, guys, check this. Here is the seal. It says, observe more carefully the cloud which is above the head of the eagle, which rays of the sun. This cloud is reminiscent of the pillar of cloud that stayed over the tabernacle as the ancient Israelites journeyed through the wilderness for 40 years. Let's see. An important mark of identity, indicating that the nation which uses it is one of the Israel family of nations. America, 13th tribe of Judah. Okay, let's go to, which tribe is the 13th? Much ado has been made of the question which tribe in ancient Israel really was the 13th tribe. B'nai and British Israelites claim that Manasseh was the 13th tribe, and so they attempt to identify the United States with the tribe of Manasseh. Bennett claims that since Joseph was the 11th tribe following Benjamin, the 12th tribe, when Manasseh and Ephraim were born, Ephraim took the place of Joseph, becoming the 11th, and this left Manasseh with being the 13th. However, this is nothing due but circular reasoning. Rabbis point out that when Jacob thought that Joseph was dead, Benjamin became the 11th tribe. Then later, when Jacob found that Joseph was still alive and had two sons, he placed his name on them. Let's see, the 12th tribe, blah, blah, blah. 13 represents fullness of Israel. Looking at it from the logical point of view, the 13th tribe would naturally be the youngest, the latest. And likewise, the United States was the youngest nation of the nations Israel, having been born much later than the Great Britain. English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish history traces far back into the mists of time. The black Irish, United States becoming a nation, 1783. Treaty of Paris. Joseph's dream. In another passage, we find another strong hint relating to the identity of Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh. When we read, Joseph had a dream and said, "The sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me," Genesis 37:9. He told the dream to his father and brothers, and Jacob said to him, "What is the dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" Joseph's brothers envied him, but Jacob kept these things in his mind. Since Ephraim was the last and 13th son born, all these things in Joseph's dream should primarily be fulfilled in him. That is, his flag would contain all 13 stars, representing all 13 tribes, and his emblem should contain all 13 stars, and the rays of the sun, Jacob, and the phases of the moon, his mother, all bowing as it were before him. And so it is that United States President's seal contains above the eagle the 13 stars complete, with the sun's rays shining down and the moon in 13 phases. This clearly pictures the fulfillment of the dream of Joseph, that his whole family would bow down to him. Okay guys, this might sound strange, but the other night I was met by a man named Malachi who had a tattoo of an eagle holding a one of those scriptures underneath it, and it had 13 stars on it. He's talking to me about the lost tribe of Judah, and he was also talking about the Black Irish, the Nephilim, the angels, as well as the East Star and Venus with Jesus. And so here's this. The book of Malachi. Who wrote the book? The final book of the Old Testament, Malachi, received its name from its author, Malachi 1:1 in Hebrew. The name comes from word meaning messenger, which points to Malachi's role as a prophet for the Lord, delivering God's message to God's people. Malachi offered no other identifying information about himself, leaving out markers typical of the other prophets, such as his father's name, the current leader of Israel. However, based on the content of the book, it becomes clear that Malachi delivered his message of judgment to a Judean audience familiar with worshiping at the Temple of Jerusalem. 2:1:1. The people of Judah had turned away from the true worship of the Lord, leaving themselves under judgment and needing of salvation. Where are we? Malachi certainly wrote to the people of Judah, but the historical setting becomes clear in Malachi 1:8. Here the prophet used the Persian word for governor, indicating the time period between 538 and 333 BC, and the Persian Empire ruled the Promised Land. Malachi also wrote about the corruption of the temple sacrifices, meaning that he likely delivered his message many years after the Israelites rebuilt the temple in 515 BC. The prophet's concerns mirror those of Nehemiah's, suggesting that Malachi prophesied to the people while Nehemiah left the city several years, beginning in 432 BC. Why is Malachi so important? Malachi's unique position in the final book of the Old Testament offers a glimpse into the hearts of Israel men and women, members of the nation that had been specially chosen by God, descendants of Abraham, and the inheritors of the rich tradition of the Jewish people. The history told glories of the Exodus from Egypt and faithfulness of God to King David. They also had an experience of the judgment of wandering in the desert and the shame of exile from the Promised Land, i.e. At the time of Malachi, well over 1,000 years after Abraham's era, the Israelites had the advantage and weight of history on their side. They could see the shining rewards of faithfulness, and the punishments associated with judgment, even to the point of being uprooted from the land. But even then, with all that perspective, the book of Malachi teaches that they still strayed from the Lord's path. They needed God's intervention so much as ever. This book is a final statement of judgment, and the Old Testament anticipates God's saving work through the Messiah, Jesus Christ. What's the big idea? The people of Judah began to be exiled from the Promised Land in 605 BC, returning from Babylon 70 years later. By the time of Malachi, they had been back in the land for more than 100 years and were looking for the blessings they expected to receive when they returned. Though the temple had been rebuilt, the fervor of those early returning Israelites gave way to a thorough apathy for the things of God. This led to the rampant corruption among the priesthood and the spiritual lethargy among the people. Malachi came along at a time when the people were struggling to believe in God, who God loved them. The people focused on their unfortunate circumstances and refused to account for their own sinful deeds. So God pointed the finger back at them, and through Malachi, God told the people that where they had fallen short of their covenant with him. If they hoped to see changes, they needed to take responsibility for their own actions and serve God faithfully according to the promise of their fathers had made to God on Mount Sinai all those years before. How do I apply this? All throughout Israel's history, the nation failed and God called his people back to himself. Each time Israel would fail again, prompting the cycle to begin again. God's final word in the Old Testament concerns judgment for sin and testifies in our inability to love him without the help of his grace. Do you struggle to follow God consistently? Malachi's call prompts us to live faithfully before God and offers hope that God is not yet through with extending mercy to his people.
That someone has to fill, right? So Judas lost his spot, but someone else filled Judas's spot. So the 144,000, what are they going to do? They are going to heaven to do what? Christ says, he spoke to the 12 apostles. He says, you are my friends, and God has given me my throne in heaven, And I am going there to prepare a place for you to come and stay with me, to rule with me as kings, priests, and judges over the earth. So the reason why the number is 144,000 is because of the pattern that God has put on the earth already. So it makes sense. I mean, it's hard for me to explain what I'm thinking, but I hope if you guys are on the same page as me, you already understood what I was trying to get to from the get-go. Like, as soon as I mentioned the Fibonacci, as soon as you saw the Fibonacci code, you already knew where I was going to with that. And props to you if you had that foresight. That means we're on the same page and you're not dumb, basically. Now, check this out.
For most of human history, people have believed in some kind of spiritual realm that exists alongside the world as we know it.
Right, and the biblical authors are no exception.
Yeah, for them, the spiritual realm is a different kind of realm than ours. And to highlight that difference, the Bible refers to God's space as the sky or the heavens.
Because the sky is really different from the land. It's above and beyond. And up there are shiny bodies that move around.
The truth is not popular, right? That's okay. But today on the Sabbath, look, someone commented on my video, and I was able to connect the dots between the Fibonacci code, the sequence that governs the earth, and 144,000 who are going to heaven, who are going to govern the earth, right? You see that path, you see that correlation? And then my friend Franco sends me a video, coincidentally, about this thing where it speaks about the divine council in heaven who were created by God to govern the earth, but they've lost their spots by joining the devil in his agenda. And so because of that, the 144,000 which God has chosen from the earth who are going to heaven are going to replace the divine council who lost their spots, and they will be the new ones who would govern the earth. So my friend didn't send me that with that in his mind, but God caused him to send me this video for me to connect the dots even more about the 144,000 and what they are really going to do in heaven. So if you guys have the patience, just keep watching.
I think of these as flaming gas balls.
But when the biblical authors looked up, the stars gave them a way to talk and think about spiritual beings. In the Bible, they're called the sons of God, or the rulers and authorities, or even sometimes the divine council.
So that sounds really important. What does the divine council do?
Well, they're introduced in Genesis chapter 1, where they're called the host of heaven, that is, the sun, moon, and stars. And there, they're also called signs, meaning that their power and status symbolizes and points to God's power and status.
Yeah, so in Genesis 1, God appoints them to rule over the day and night.
Exactly. And then later in the Bible, we're told that they were celebrating God's power and creativity when he created the world.
Like the...
Okay. I'm just going to interject here real quick. They say signs. Now, if you never heard of this, there's something called a monad, which is a sine wave, which is a -1, and a +1, which block each other out, which is a 0. Now, they've found that the monad is a continuous energy that cannot be created or destroyed, and it is basically the soul of the body that we're given by God. And there's this video I watched, this person named Morg. It's just like a pseudo religion that he made. He was a street performer or stage performer, and I don't agree with him. I agree with Christianity 100%. But here's a description of what a monad is and the sign.
A monad is another word for eternal mind. They're the same thing, and that's exactly what you are. That's what I am too. We are all monads. Our real selves aren't what we see in the mirror. We're not physical beings at all, not truly. You are an eternal mind, made up of non-physical mental content, which links to a physical body and controls it. And since this eternal mind is also what we call a monad, then we can reasonably conclude that a monad is the real you. Monad is a Greek word which means unit. Monads are individual units of mind. You can think of these units as containers because they contain thoughts. In fact, they contain an infinite amount. Monads are infinite, and since you are a monad, that means you are infinite too. It might be helpful to visualize each monad like an egg. Each egg is its own unit, but inside of each egg is a vast amount of information. Not only do these eggs contain a vast amount of information, the containers themselves are also vast in number. A myriad of monads exist. It's also important to note that these units not only contain thoughts, but are actually made of thoughts. In a mental universe, it can't be any other way. Everything is made of mind, and everything reduces to mind. So in a very real sense, the container is the content. Remember that comparing a monad to an egg is just an analogy, so we can better visualize this concept. In reality, an egg would be a physical object that you could measure and hold in your hands. But a monad is actually dimensionless. It has no dimension and it can't be measured. We can't see it, just as we can't see thoughts. Monads belong to the mental domain, which means they exist outside of space and time. All the monads in existence are here in the mental realm we call the source. Nothing in the source has physical dimension or extension. We would say this domain of mind is unextended because nothing there can be measured with a ruler. In Hyperianism, we know that the fundamental building blocks of the universe must be mental in nature. They must be dimensionless. But how can our monads be containers for an infinite amount of mental content, yet still be dimensionless and take up no space? Glad you asked. It's because all of the information a monad contains ultimately balances to perfect zero. Here, we're dealing with the beauty of mathematical symmetry through the union of opposites. Every thought within a monad has a number associated with it. If every possible number also has its opposite accounted for inside a monad, the total nets to zero. Think of +1 and -1 combining to make 0. 0 takes up no space. Nothing can prevent a 0 from existing because it requires nothing outside of itself to create it. And because it can't be created, it cannot be destroyed. This loaded 0 is what a monad is. It's what your mind is. 0 is eternal. Your mind, your monad, is eternal. And all the thoughts and information that we've been talking about, you know, what a monad is composed of, well, to be more specific, these are actually mathematical waves of differing frequencies, all balancing to 0, of course. Now, the big question that arises from all of this is, where do these waves come from? Surely there must be a reason why a monad would contain all this mathy stuff while still being equivalent to 0. Come to think of it, what do these mental monads have to do with our everyday world of matter anyway?
Now, it's said that the sacred societies know about the monad and the secret of consciousness, and the secret society starting in ILL and ending in ATI, and they're trying to use it for nefarious purposes, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Now back to the other video. Sorry for the video inception, the video inside of a video.
That there's more to the scripture than people realize, and that just like when God made humans, right? He told humans to have in subjection everything on the earth. The animals, the flowers, the plants, everything is under our feet, right? We are to take care of the earth and make the whole world a paradise, and have in subjection all the animals, the fish, the birds, everything, all the creeping things, the insects, everything, right? They are under our dominion. So we are the rulers. Mankind is the ruler of the earth. We are not rulers over each other. No, we are rulers over what God has put on the earth, right? So all the animals have a form of God's image, but they do not have the complete form of God's image. Only mankind does. So since they have a form of God's image, God is giving mankind authority over these other spirit beings that are not in the full image of God, and so they can be governed over, right? So that's our dominion. But the angels have dominion over us. Okay, the angels have dominion over us just as much as we have dominion over the things on the earth. The angels have dominion over all the things on the earth. And in the Bible, God said that. Let me paraphrase. in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, those of you who have not seen that video will not really understand what I'm saying here, but hopefully God will help you to see that video and understand where I'm going to with this. But in Deuteronomy chapter 28, Moses said that God divided the nations of the world according to his heavenly court, according to his heavenly realm, or according to the sons of God, right? And you would say that no, it's according to the sons of Israel. Well, you would have to watch that video for me to understand why that translation is completely inaccurate and false. Man, you see, like I said, this video is going to be all over the place. But no, there is a divine council in heaven, which is why at the time of Ahab, which is going to be spoken about in this video real quick, but in the time of Ahab, there was a divine council in heaven, where God asked, who will fool Ahab? Okay, I'm not going to talk about that because it's going to make this video longer than it's supposed to, and a lot of you don't have the long attention span to even stay till this point of the video. Like at the time of Job too, there was a divine council, which Satan entered up into that divine council, and God questioned Satan, where are you coming from? Okay, God holds meetings in the heavens. There is a heavenly court. There is a heavenly realm of judges, but these heavenly beings betrayed God and follow the devil in his agenda, which is why in the book of Revelation, it says that the great dragon dragged a third of the stars from heaven, meaning he influenced a third of God's sons. The stars are alluding to God's sons, okay? Which is why this video is speaking about the sons and stars are actually the sons of God. It's twofold. The meaning is twofold. It's the literal sons and the stars and all of that, but it's also speaking about the actual sons of God at the same time. So when the dragon drew a third of the stars, it means he influenced these rulers whom God has put to rule over the earth. Just like mankind fell and they didn't obey God and they went renegade, so too these rulers that God put over the earth, they went renegade and followed the devil in the devil's agenda. And so because they lost their spot, God is going to replace them with people from the earth, and he's going to give them the very thing that they lost. And he's going to give Christ the very thing that the devil wanted, which is worship and kingship and all authority.
All right, so a quick note, 144,000 was 1/3 of the heavenly council, so there must be 432,000. And I went and I looked at 432 in the Bible. It says, Acts 4:32, all the believers were in one heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. So that means the entire body of Christ, the church, needs to all come together in one heart and mind in order to defeat the enemy.
And Christ is going to share this authority with his friends. And the sequence is followed after the same sequence that governs the earth, which is the Fibonacci code, which ends at 144,000 at the 12th number. You see?
God's power and creativity when he created the world.
Like the cheering section of a game.
Yeah, right. There are also stories in the Bible where God invites the divine council to participate in making a decision. Like when they help decide how to bring down the corrupt Israelite king Ahab. Or in the book of Job, where they debate God's policy of rewarding people who do good.
So they're like God's staff team. But why does God need a team? If he's powerful enough to create the whole universe, he could surely rule it without any help.
Well, he doesn't need them. But apparently, the God of the Bible wants to share authority with others.
Oh, right. God shares his rule with human partners on earth. And so, in the same way, there's a parallel story of God sharing his authority to rule with spiritual partners.
Yes, that is, until it all falls apart in a twin rebellion. So you have humans who want to rule on earth on their own terms. So they start building their own nation using their own definitions of good and evil.
Yeah, the famous story of the building of Babylon.
But check this out. When biblical authors like Moses or Isaiah looked back at the origins of Babylon, they saw more than just a human rebellion, but also a spiritual rebellion.
What was this spiritual rebellion?
Well, there were members of the divine council who, like the humans, didn't want to represent God's authority anymore.
I'm going to interject again. Okay, so previously I read the Bible, I had Jesus exorcised me. I had a dream that night of a girl in a hospital robe and a birthmark. That girl got into my cab. She had the birthmark. I caught it on video. You can go back to my other videos and see it. But she told me that her mom was playing with the Ouija board when she was in her womb. She caught this thing on her nanny cam interacting with her kid in his crib 5 seconds after her husband left the room. So that thing that you just saw, you're going to see it in real life. It's one of the fallen. It called itself Ozue, or warrior, in Cherokee. Now, back to the video.
Who, like the humans, didn't want to represent God's authority anymore. They wanted to be God, and they rebelled. And so these created beings deceived humans into worshiping them instead of the Creator. And so Babylon becomes the biblical image for the combined human and spiritual rebellion.
And so God scatters the people from Babylon into different nations.
And in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses says, this is when God also scattered the rebels of the divine council with them.
So the nations are handed over to spiritual rulers.
Yes, and this is why when the biblical prophets look out at the violent empires of their day, they see two dimensions to all the chaos and injustice. Human rebels who are being corrupted by the worship of spiritual rebels.
For example, so that you guys know that this isn't all fable, this is why the God of Persia resisted the angel of God whom God sent to deliver a message to Daniel, and took 21 days because Daniel was in Persia, and there is a spirit realm of Persia. And so in order for the angel of God to get to Daniel, he would have to go through the prince of Persia, and the prince of Persia resisted him. So this means he is not with the agenda of God. He's against the agenda of God. And so Michael had to come and help this angel of God to go against the prince of Persia, you see. And even for that angel of God to leave the nation of Persia, he had to go in battle with another angel again, another demon actually, but they are all angels at the end of the day. So a lot goes on in the spirit realm that you guys don't understand, but just because you don't understand it don't mean you should just throw it in the garbage. It is extremely valid, and hopefully you'll find that video that I made on this subject.
The idol gods of money, sex, and military power.
Yeah, when humans give their allegiance to these powers, it leads to a world like ours.
Right, and the best example of this is the story of the Exodus, where we're told that the Egyptian genocide of the Israelites was inspired by Pharaoh and by the gods of Egypt.
That's really intense.
But it's not the end of the story. When God rescued the Israelites from Egypt and its gods, he invited them to become his covenant partners and learn a different way of ruling the world.
And they agree to it, but in the end they don't honor the partnership. They give their allegiance to other gods.
And so this leads to their exile in Babylon, where they become slaves once again to a foreign nation and their spiritual rulers, awaiting a new exodus into freedom. And this is where the story of Jesus picks up. He said he was here to rescue the world and take it back from the rebels.
Which rebels? The human ones or the spiritual ones?
Exactly. For Jesus, it was all connected. When he marched into Jerusalem for Passover, he was announcing the ultimate exodus. He was there to confront and overcome all rebel powers and authorities, and he did it by giving up his life.
So this is what the Apostle Paul meant when he said that Jesus disarmed the powers and authorities, triumphing over them by the cross.
Yes, Jesus condemned our evil by allowing the rebels to unleash all their hate and evil on him. But then he overcame it with the power of his love and resurrection life. And then Jesus told his followers that all authority in heaven and earth now belongs to him.
Yeah, the ultimate human and divine partner. This is really...
Yes. And he wants to share this authority with his friends, who the total sum of them is 144,000, the 12th number of the Fibonacci sequence, and based off of the pattern of the Fibonacci sequence. You see? So basically, the point of this video is not even about all that I just talked about. The point of it is, this Fibonacci sequence was discovered in the Middle Ages. Meanwhile, this Fibonacci sequence is what governs the world and the patterns that the world takes, right? Including the universe, the galaxies around us, and the rose petals and everything, right? And within our own bodies. It governs our world. How fitting then that God chooses this same number of individuals based off of the Fibonacci sequence, based off of the numbers that govern us and the pattern that governs us. How fitting that God chooses this same amount of people to literally govern the world during the millennial reign of Christ, right? See, and because the world belongs to the devil, that's why the devil was able to offer this temptation to Christ, to hopefully that Christ would, submit and fall like the other stars of heaven. But Christ is so close to the Father and loves the Father so much that he could never waver in his trust to God. And he said he would rather wait for God to give him all authority than for the devil to give him this flimsy authority of just ruling the world. Right? So again, that kind of tells you that Christ is not God. I mean, the devil is going to tempt God with something that already belongs to God. Everything belongs to God. And the devil knows who Christ is. The devil knows that Christ is not God. That's why he could dare try and tempt Christ with something as flimsy as the nation of the world. Because you can't tempt God with anything. It doesn't matter if Christ is God in the flesh, you can't tempt him with anything. Maybe you could tempt him with women, okay, fine, because he's a man, okay? But you're going to tempt God with the nations of the world, something that already belongs to God? What type of temptation is that? That's an easy temptation for Christ if Christ is God. But it's not an easy temptation if Christ is not God, just as much as it wasn't an easy temptation for the divine council in heaven who left God, who fell for the devil's bait. Because they are not God, so they can fall for that. They were able to be influenced by the devil's tail, and they follow the devil's agenda. Christ could have been influenced too, which is why the devil tried to get Christ to fall. But Christ did not fall because he loves God. But he is not God. That tells you something, people. Man, am I the only one who could think this deep? Goodness gracious. All right, I'll end it at that. Later.
Okay, I just noticed this. The MIT producers made this video game with mushrooms, psychedelic, and they also put spirals on the balls, the Fibonacci sequence. And I wonder why they made those characters that kind of look like witches walk around.
But how it portrays itself to you as the first person view, as the person who's walking at close to speed of light speeds, is that it seems like you're going faster. So you can get more movement through space in a given time. Now you can see this effect in this way. Notice in this part of the game there's some evenly spaced orbs. So as I collect each orb, the speed of light is going to get slower and slower and slower, even though my walking speed is going to be the same. So what that means is that even though my speed is the same, the relativistic effects are going to get stronger and stronger and stronger as I collect each orb. And that means also that each orb I'm collecting, my time dilation is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, even though I'm staying at the same walking speed. And so you'll notice that as I collect each one, notice the time interval in between collecting them gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And what that means is that for me experiencing it, it seems like I'm getting to each one faster. But the reason that it seems like that is because my time is actually getting slower relative to somebody watching me. So I'm able to cover more distance in a given amount of time. So that's time dilation. Effectively, as a person who's moving at extreme speeds close to the speed of light, what you would experience in terms of time dilation is that you can get from point A to point B seemingly faster than you could normally. Okay, now the other effect here is length contraction. Now this is something that blew my mind with this simulation. It's something that I never really grasped until I did the simulation. Okay, so first remember that when something approaches the speed of light, its length contracts. So the faster you go, the more squished that your length becomes. So as you approach the speed of light, you get more squished. So that goes both ways. For example, if you were on a train going near the speed of light, somebody watching that train pass would say that the train were actually shorter than it was. And if you were on that train and you were watching some stationary object, you would say that that thing was actually shorter. So both of you would say that each thing is shorter. So as you approach the speed of light, things get squished together. But here's the interesting point. Notice in this simulation, as I start to walk, so as I approach the speed of light, things get stretched out. Now the easiest way to see this is I'm going to turn off the Doppler effect, collect my last orb, so now the speed of light is really close to my walking speed. So the relativistic effects are really strong here. So notice as I start to walk now, notice how far away the cliffs seem like they get. So the length gets stretched out. But I just told you that when you go closer to the speeds of light, length actually contracts. Now this is a really confusing point, and a lot of people have gotten this wrong in the past. In fact, there was an entire book written on this subject by an author named Gamow in 1940, and the book was about a person who they rode their bike through this mystical city, and in that city the speed of light was slowed down so much that it was about the speed of a bicycle. But in his book, he mentioned how as he rode his bicycle, all the lengths contracted, so everything looked squished together. And that would seem like what it should be. But here's the interesting point. For the most part, length contraction does not appear as something being squished, but it actually appears as something being stretched out and lengthened and also rotated a little bit. Even though length contraction is occurring, this is not what you would see. What you would see is completely different than what you would measure as length. And that's because the photons in your line of sight in the direction of your travel are leaving the thing that you're seeing at different points in the past. So for example, if you're looking at something, you see it being stretched out because the photons from the back of it take longer to get there than the front of it. And so it actually appears as though the thing is being stretched out and not contracted, even though it really is being contracted. Now this is strange because it completely distorts our view of reality. What we're seeing is not what actually is. So as you approach the speed of light, I had always imagined it that everything becomes squished together until eventually everything's compact together and you're seeing everything kind of all at once. But that's not what it would look like. What it would look like is that everything becomes spaghettified out really long. The closer you get to the speed of light, the more stretched out everything gets in front of you, and also the faster it seems like you're getting to each place because your time has slowed down. So really what it looks like to approach the speed of light in terms of length contraction and time dilation is that everything gets stretched out and you seem to start going at almost infinite speeds.
God sees and controls everything that's in front of him. The all-seeing eye of light, and then there's the all-seeing light of darkness. 1/3 of 432,000 is 144,000, or the speed of light. The other 2/3 is 288,000 minutes of arc per second. 1/3 and 2/3 is the golden ratio, what I've been being shown.
Until eventually at the speed of light, everything is infinitely stretched out and you're passing it at infinite speeds.
To infinity and beyond!
Now what this also means in terms of length contraction is if something were moving in front of you at near speeds of the speed of light, you wouldn't actually see it being squished together either in that direction. What you would see is that we're actually stretched out and rotated a little bit. So if, for example, if a dice flew in front of you at near speeds of light, it wouldn't look contracted actually. So instead of looking like this, it would look like this. Now even after special relativity first came out, it took another 50 or so years until one physicist named James Turrell actually came up with the idea of the body looking like it were being rotated. And this effect is actually named for him. It's a little known effect called the Turrell effect. And what it means is that you don't see something contracted when it's going near the speed of light, but you actually see it stretched out and rotated. And you can see this in the game when I walk right and left, it seems like I'm turning. So I'm only moving to the right here, but it looks like I'm turning. I'm not turning at all. That's just the apparent rotation due to the Turrell effect. And notice also that when I move backwards, everything seems to come towards me. So that's where the length contraction seems to occur, but it actually happens when I'm moving backwards away from stuff. All right, so that is what it would look like if the speed of light were slowed down. So what this would mean in this simulation is if you wanted to stay younger longer, you'd have to move more. So the people who were pretty active in life, they would age slower than the people who were pretty sedentary in life. And it's funny how close this is to almost our reality, but for a different reason.
All right, so theoretical physicists found out that if you do not observe particles, they form waves with, I believe, unlimited amount of interference patterns or projected paths. Now, once it was observed, it would collapse into solid matter and create two slits. Now watch this.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double-slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So, they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never world of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
So these demonic entities run on a interference pattern exactly negative or opposite to God's light. It seems like they're operating in different speeds of light and thus different speeds in time. Therefore, the body, which was shown, was stretched and twisted, that came and descended upon her kid in his crib.
So this setup that I did here actually has a name. It's called a Michelson interferometer. And what's cool about this is the reason it interferes with each other is because those mirrors are not exactly placed equidistant from each other from the center beam splitter. And so if they're slightly off, you'll get an interference pattern. If they were exactly right, there would be no interference pattern. So what that means is if those mirrors move by any multiple of a half a wavelength of that light, then you'll see the interference pattern move on the background. And so you can use this to pick up the smallest, minutest movements of those mirrors. In fact, it's so sensitive that it picks up almost any movement. You can use it as a seismograph, you can use it to pick up the thermal expansion of metals, anything that you strap that mirror to. If that mirror moves by a few nanometers, then you'll be able to pick it up as a movement of those bands. In fact, in doing this experiment, even just walking around on my garage floor, which is pure concrete, if I take a step, then it messes up the bands. Okay, watch me just take a step in my garage. So that was me just slightly stepping my foot on the ground. This is me tapping on the cement ground.
Now, if you don't believe in God or Jesus or otherworldly spiritual beings, you better start now. Amen. Take a look at this video of this girl getting her left leg miraculously healed.
But theism is the biblical philosophy, and theism says God not only created the world then, but he controls it now. I've met some Christians who believe any miracle if it's bound in black leather. But miracles today, they don't believe.
I just finished the video and I looked at the length. I looked it up in Strong's Concordance. 7148 means Kari, to be chosen, to be called, to be famous. Amen. The length of the video was also 1 hour, 11 minutes, 111, and 47 seconds. 1147 means this. John 11:47-53. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that of the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Amen.